So, I've been thinking about archetypes that exist in stories for women, and the first thing that comes to my mind is I've spoken about before the Madonna whore complex and how that relates to mothers, and how in a story, if you're a mother, usually you are either a pure good mother who's never done anything wrong and is only filled with maternal instinct and has no personality outside of being a mom, or you're an evil stepmother, and people attribute this evil stepmother trope to Catelyn, but it doesn't really work. She's actually a character made with nuance and not just an archetype. And it made me think further about the Madonna horror complex and more so about these archetypes that exist for female characters in traditional stories or fantasy stories in general. And there's three archetypes that I see, and I don't think it happens as often anymore, but I do see it as like a old school fantasy archetype. And you'll see these three archetypes of women, and that is either the disposable girlfriend, the evil queen, or the good, deified, pure, saint-like mother. And when I say this out loud, because I always talk to myself about my ideas, it made me think about A Song of Ice and Fire and the idea of how we have this trinity called, and it's the mother, maiden, crone. And it made me think about Daenerys and how she has a quote in the first book before she goes into the pyre where she says, "Yesterday I was a child, today I am a woman, tomorrow I will be old." So she's calling herself essentially the maiden mother crone without actually saying the terms maiden mother crone. And it makes sense because Daenerys isn't really like particularly religious herself. And it made me think about how George is sort of, I hate to kind of keep using this word, but like he's subverting this sort of typical trope where in a typical story, a female character is introduced and she's one of these three things. She's either a disposable girlfriend, an evil queen, or a saint-like mother. And Daenerys is all of these things when she is the maiden mother crone. But she's not an oversimplification or a gross stereotype. She's not a disposable girlfriend meant to be killed by some man so that he can have a power up. And she is a young girl who wants to laugh and plant trees, but she's not she's not she's not a stereotype. She is a mother, but she's not a mother in the sense that in these stories, women aren't only allowed to be mothers and nothing else, and they're not allowed to be fierce. They're only allowed to be good and pure and saint-like, and she's not pure and saint-like in the sense that she's a person with nuance, and a person with nuance cannot just be pure. I feel like in a lot of stories, mothers are not allowed to be people; they're only allowed to be mothers. And with the crone, usually in stories, it's usually an evil old queen as a crone who's jealous of beauty. But in George's story, the crone is somebody who's supposed to give you wisdom and show you the things you need to do to become wise. And she falls into that because she understands magic. And I think the crone is very much of a magical thing. But it's also just a term of wisdom. And I lost my place in my script. I love when I lose my place. Thank you for waiting until I figure out where the fuck I lost myself. What interests me is that Daenerys doesn't really fall into these sort of like tropes. And it does interest me that Daenerys is all of these things and then none of the things that people try to make her out to be. So, for example, the disposable girlfriend trope. Think about Euron, Victarion, Quentin, Young Griff. They all just want to use her to gain a power. And I wouldn't put it past Euron to try to sacrifice Daenerys to get a dragon. But that won't happen because she's not a disposable girlfriend. Daenerys is a mother. She's a mother of dragons. But she's not a mother in the sense that in the traditional sense of stories where like mothers are just good, pure, and they never do anything bad and they don't have personalities. She's not that. She's so much more than that. And that's not to say that being a mother isn't extremely important. It is important and it is a big part of her identity, but it does not limit her. She's also the crone in the sense that she is wise. She does make mistakes, but she is ultimately very wise when it comes to magic and just ruling in general. Like, yes, she makes mistakes as a ruler, but overall, for a 14-year-old, 15-year-old, she's pretty wise for a ruler. And she's not an evil queen. She just makes mistakes. She's a teenage girl, which obviously ties her back to the maiden and all this magical shit that's happening when you think of the crone. And yes, she's confused, but she will overcome these things and understand these things as her hero's or heroine's journey continues. I also saw in an interview that George was talking about the Faith of the Seven and how, like the Faith of the Seven, it's like one person, there's one God, but it's seven faces. In the same way that in Catholicism, it's the Holy Trinity, the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit, but it's one God and his three faces. And the idea of like the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit is basically the same thing as the maiden, the mother, and the crone. And I think it's a really cool subversion that something that is usually perceived as masculine gets made feminine in a way. And it's another comparison to Catholicism and Jesus is that three wise men essentially come to Daenerys to see the birth of her children who are already born. And Daenerys's dragons are Jesus and she's Mary, but Daenerys is also Jesus. And the three wise men who come to see Jesus are Zoroastrians, which I find interesting because Zoroastrianism is the religion that Valorism is based off of. And I don't think that Quaithe or Zaros and Daxos or I forgot the other guy's name. I don't think they follow Valorism, but I just think it's a really cool comparison that like the three warlocks of Karth and the three wise men come to see the birth of these very important beings into the world. And it made me think about George's background as a Catholic. And I know George doesn't practice Catholicism anymore, but as somebody who was also raised Catholic and went to Catholic school growing up and no longer practices, I can tell you that you kind of never stop being Catholic culturally. And I think you can see this in George's writing when it comes to mothers, that even if a mother has died before the story or they're a POV chapter, they are important. Liana and Elia haunt the narrative. And I think this comes from like a Catholic upbringing, because Catholics put a very big emphasis on Mary because she's a saint and she's very revered because she's the mother of God. And I don't think other branches of Christianity really do this. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like I feel like other people are shocked that Catholics think Mary is important, which is so interesting to me, because as somebody who was raised Catholic, I'm like, why wouldn't she be important? She literally gave birth to Jesus. Like, what? And God literally chose her to do something fucking insane, and she knew that she could have been killed for it, and she did it anyway. Anyway, not the point. Not to get all Catholic on you. This also ties back to with Mary being important and the mother being important. It ties back to Arya telling Jon that the woman is important too, when Jon brings up that Joffrey has the Lannister sigil on him along with the Baratheon sigil, which ties back into Lyanna. The mother is just as important, and I think this emphasis on motherhood and mothers being just as important as men and fathers, and sometimes even more important than men, is very much, I feel like it's a very Catholic thing to be like, well, of course the mother's important too. And yeah, those are just my thoughts on religion and like Catholicism and the Faith of the Seven and all that in the story. Like, I just wrote this randomly down in my notes and I wanted to talk about it. Oh, and I almost forgot to say this, but also the idea of like the triple moon goddess. That's something that doesn't have to do with Catholicism, but that's obviously a very big point of like the maiden, the mother, and the crone, the Father, and the Holy Spirit, and the triple moon goddess. All of that is like combined together. I forgot to say that because it just like slipped my mind, even though like the image is right in front of me. But yes, that also too.